smoothly this block. We're on the bottom of the page. Today's daf is daf tes, daf ches, and we're on the bottom of daf zayin amud beis in the last line. Let us review the question that we've had so many times before. The pasuk, we have this pasuk over here that says, Aleha, v'isha el achoisa loisikach legalos litra legalos or vasa aleha b'chayeha. And what the pasuk means to say is that one is not permitted to take his wife's sister as one of the, if she falls to yibim, there's an isser, you're not supposed to do yibim with your wife's sister. Not only is she usher, but also the wife, the tzara of that woman. So if you want to see the picture of it, right over here, Ruvain married two ladies, and one of them is his wife's sister. Ada is the sister of his brother. So two brothers married two sisters, and Shimon dies. And if Tzila falls to Yibam, Ruvain does not do, I'm sorry, if Ruvain dies, Shimon does not do Yibam with Ada, nor with the Tzara Chana. Okay, we saw that. Hi, Sheldon, we just began.
Okay.
Thank you. So very simple. So the Gemara is basically questioned before, why do I need this pasuk to tell me not to do Yibam with your wife's sister? It's an essay, Sheyesh by Karis, right? That was the whole Gemara's question. Why do I need this pasuk, Oleha, to tell you that you don't do Yibam with your wife's sister? This pasuk over here, it's an essay, Sheyesh by Karis. So the Gemara came to a very nice, at the end of yesterday's daf, the Gemara came to a very nice conclusion. That the reason is because since we see that in every Yibam, you are automatically having relations with an arayis. You're having relations with one of the arayis, your brother's wife. So we say the concept of hoil the ishtri, like you see in the Gemara over here. Hoil the ishtri. Once something is permitted, since the Torah permitted you the Eishes Ach part, so huadin, the Torah permitted you with, even if it's another arayis, along with the Eishes Ach, the Torah permitted it once the floodgate is open and the rug is pulled out, you're allowed to do, I would have thought, you're allowed to have Yibam with your wife's sister. That's why I need to allow to tell you that you don't do Yibam with your wife's sister. Now, where do you see this concept? So I get the oven.
I get
the oven. Jetzt ungeheben.
Ja, ich habe gegriffen, was noch ungehakt. So sind du.
Ich bin du.
Hört mich auf.
Ja, mit jetzt mamisch ungeheben. Man halt darf sein und mit Beis, man sagt die Yevamos in der letzte Shira. Aber Eide, man geht sich magdem sein nach Purak Dummes. So here we are. So the Gemara said, this case over here, the Gemara says, where do you see that hoil the ishtri? We see that this is the Beis HaMikdash. Now, a Mitzayra is not allowed to, it has part of his service is that he's supposed to enter the Beis HaMikdash and bring a carbon. And he gets up to this point over here, right over here, where I'm my finger, right over there, and then sticks his thumb into this area, into the Ezras Yisrael, which is right near the Ezras Kahanim. And the Kohen comes over here and sprays the blood of the keves onto him. So the Gemara said to the Gemara, that's what a normal Mitzayra does. Comes along the Gemara and says, what happens if you have a Mitzayra that was also a Tvil Yom? That means that the day he was supposed to bring his carbon, the 8th day after he got healed from his tsaras, he's supposed to bring a carbon. He had a shichva zera. He had a nocturnal emission that came out of him, and he went right away to the mikvah. So normally a tvul yom can't either go into this section over here. But what happens if we need this tvul yom to go into this section? In other words, today is the 14th day of Nisan. And if we wait till he's no more at tvul yom, that means we wait till sunset, till the sun goes down, then he's going to not be able to eat the carbon Pesach at that night Seder. So here's the case. You have, again, this is Machne Shechina, where Metzora Zav, nobody can go into the main sanctuary area. That's called the camp, the Shechina camp. Then the outer camp is called Machne Leviyah, where generally Metzora Zav can't go in there. And Metzora definitely is on the outside of all camps. He's right over there. But on the 8th day, he's tar, right? If Metzora got cleaned and he went to the mikvah, so he has to bring his carbonis, so he would stick his thumb in here. But what would happen if he's, in addition to now, if he gets this Balkari thing and then he goes to the mikveh, he's a Tvul Yoim. So he can get into the place over here. He can walk up and get into the Makam HaMikdash, but he also has to stick his finger in here. Now, by sticking his finger in here, according to Ula, once you stick your finger, it's almost as if you walked in the whole area yourself. So why is the Metzora, who's a Tvul Yoim, allowed to stick his finger into this place over here? Since by doing so, it's almost as if he's standing in the main sanctuary, which he's not allowed to do. So Ula said, so we see from here that since the Torah gave you permission as a mechusa kippurim of a Metzora who's a mechusa kippurim, who didn't bring his karbonis yet, he's allowed to stick his finger. So if we tack on to him, he's also a Tvul Yoim. So since that part was permitted for him, so also the fact that he's a Tvul Yoim would also allow him to stick his finger in there, even though it's almost as if he came in. But no, since there's an amnesty for the Mechusa Kippurim Metzora, there's an amnesty for this Tvul Yoim. That's what the Gemara says. So again, what the Gemara just got through saying is that there's an amnesty for all arayas. I would think that there was an amnesty for Eishes Ach, and once there's an amnesty for Eishes Ach, you could marry your wife's sister. That's why I need the Aleha. So the Gemara says, bottom of the page of Zayin Amud Beis, Mi Dami L'Deula. How could you compare the case of Yevamos to the case of Ula? Because Teinach, it makes perfect sense. We go to Chesem and Aleph. Heiche de Nosa Meis, V'achar Kach Nosa Chai. The migoy the ishtri iser eshes ach ishtri name achois isha, and that means like this: that let's say this is the case. I mean, in a normal case, where the brother that died, he married Rachel, right? He married that lady. Shimon, before he married his wife, Shimon was also on Rachel because it's the wife of Ruvain. So first on Rachel, what was the issa that came first on Rachel? Eishes Ach. Now that Shimon married Leah, so what comes later? Achois Isha. So first it was Eishes Ach, and then we was Achois Isha. So when Reuven dies, since Rachel had the Eishes Ach is permitted, right? The Torah says you're allowed to marry your brother's wife in Yibam. So that would apply also that you're allowed to marry your brother's wife, even if she's Achois Ishtoi. Because the permissible thing came first. The thing that's being amnesty, the Eishes Ach, is being taken off first. But what would happen in the other case if Shimon married Leah first? If Shimon married Leah first, so now Shimon was also on Rachel prior to Reuven marrying Rachel, because Shimon was also on Rachel because this is a Chois Ishtoi. Now that Reuven married Rachel, so now, if first on Rachel was a Chois Ishtoi, and then came upon her Eishes Ach. So you wouldn't say that since you permit a Chois Ishtoi, you permit Eishes Ach. It was also first, and so we wouldn't apply the same logic, because by the case of Metzora, first he was a Metzora first, and then it became a Tvul Yoim. So it's not similar to Ula's case entirely. That's what the Gemara says. Tinach. You can compare it to Ula's case. If the dead brother married first, so now on this woman that he married is an Eishes Ach, then the live brother married the wife's sister, that Mace's sister, the Migoy. So now when his brother died, the Migoy, you can say the Ishtri Isra Eishes Ach. Since the Eishes Ach falls off, Ishtri Name, we say Isha Chois Isha, then the Chois Isha would fall off. Yes, that would make sense. That's equal to Ula's case. Ella, but in a case, Nosa Chai, V'achakach Nosa Meis. But what happens if the guy, the live brother, the one that's going to stay alive, Shimon, in our case, he married a lady first. So his wife's sister was also prior to his brother marrying her. So then if Nasa Chai, he married first, Nasa Meis, then his brother who's going to die married second, Issa Achois Isha Kodem. What came first on that lady? The Issa of your wife's sister. And therefore, there is no amnesty on your wife's sister. So how is the rug pulled out in that case that you would say you're allowed to do Yibam? And even the Gemara takes it one step further. That's never compared to Ula's case. It's not compared to Ula's case. Even if he married the mace one married first, right? It would make sense. First, the Ruvain married the wife and then died right away. So right away, Rachel falls to Yibam, to Shimon. But before he did Yibam, then Shimon married the lady's sister, because the Chazile, the Bina. There was an interim period where technically Shimon could have married Reuven's wife, but instead he married Reuven's wife's sister first. So since there was an Eishes Ach period where he could have done Eishes Ach, and then he married the wife's sister. Since it was permitted for permitted Eishes Ach, we say Achois Ishta is permitted, but because that is very similar to Ula's case. The Mitzorah when he was the 14th of Nisan in the morning, he was a regular Mitzorah. He could have gone into the base of Migdash and brought his karbonas. What happened? He became a Tvul Yoim that day. He had an nocturnal mission, went right away into the mikvah. So there was a period where he was just a Mitzorah, and then later on, we added that Tvul Yoim problem on him. So since by Mitzorah, we allow him to go and stick his thumb in, so the fact that he has a Tvul Yoim added to him, that gives him amnesty. Once we're letting him as a Mitzorah stick his thumb in, we can let him as a Tvul Yoim come in. But let's say the dead brother married and didn't die yet. But the live brother right away, while his brother was still alive, married the wife's sister. So loy is chazile klal. This woman never fell to Yibam at all. This woman, in this case, when Reuven married first Rachel, didn't die yet, and Shimon married Leah right afterwards. So at no point was Rachel permitted to Shimon. Only after, when Reuven dies, then Rachel, we could think about Rachel being, but there was no interim period where just Rachel was permitted to Shimon. So that's not a case of Ishtre that we can compare it to Ula's case. So then again, why would I need the Aleh? Wouldn't Ula agree to this concept? If the person had a nocturnal mission, he became a Tvul Yoim, basically in the night of the 8th. In other words, the night of the 14th, right by Bedikas Chometz, he became a Tvul Yoim. So at one point, he was a Mitzorah and a Tvul Yoim at the same time. The next day, when you're burning the chametz and you're supposed to bring your carbon Pesach, he had right away 2 problems on him, Mitzorah and Tvul Yom. So there was never a moment where where the Torah said you could stick your thumb in, because at one point, both problems came. So in that case, he can't stick his hand with the thumbs. There was no point that he could bring a carbon by himself. So again, you wouldn't say hoil the Ishtre by most cases of Yibam. So in Cain, why do I need Aleh? I would never say that you're permitted to marry your wife's sister. So here's the final teretz of all the Gemara, Daf Ches, which we started in Daf Gimel. The Gemara is giving you the final teretz over here. Ella, ki itztrich Aleh. What do I need Aleh first? Is by that only one case. Heicha de Nasames, a man married, and then he died right away. So at one point, his brother's wife was permitted to him. Umes, he died right away. And then she was supposed to fall to Yibam. Instead of doing Yibam, he married the wife's sister. So there was an interim period where he could have married his dead brother's wife, but did not. He chose to marry his wife's sister. So I would have thought in that case, since she was already permitted to him as Eishes Ach, if she later turns out to be his wife's sister, I would think that you could still do Yibam to that lady. Kamash Malon allow that you can't do Yibam to that lady. So that's the only case of why you would need the Aleha. Then the Gemara says, I'll tell you another reason why you need Aleha. I would say another reason why I need Aleha. Asya behekesha mid Rabbi Yoina. I would say a hekesh of Rabbi Yoina. Rabbi Yoina had a hekesh that said anything that's permitted by in a hekesh, you can't really ask too many questions. Anything that's permitted by one arayas is permitted by all arayas. Okay, and anything that's usher by one arayas is usher by all arayas. For example, what is called having znus with arayas? Do you have to have a total penetration? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yoina said that you don't need to, because the Torah told you by one of them, you don't need a total penetration. So also by all arayas, you don't need a total penetration. So same idea. If the Torah tells you, so a hekesh tells you a juxtaposition. So then say the same thing. If the Torah tells you Eishes Ach is permitted, then we can say by all other arayas, you're allowed to do Yibam. That's what he says. The Amma Rabbi Yoina v'Itema Rabbi Yehuda B'Rei B'Shua Amma Kra Kichol Asha Eyasa Mikol Atavei V'Suelu V'Nichrasu. All arayas get chorus. Hukshu Kol arayas Kula Eishes Ach. So we can say the same idea. All the arayas are compared to Eishes Ach, to your brother's wife. Ma Eishes Ach, your brother's wife Shoria is permitted when you're doing Yibam. Av Kol arayas Nami Shoria. I would think that all arayas would be permitted to do Yibam. So the Torah says that don't do Yibim if it's anything but Eishes Ach. If it's your wife, if it's your daughter or your wife's sister, you don't do Yibim. So that's what I need allow. So the Gemara says no. Amalei Rav Achim Yedifti LeRavina. Rav Achim Yedifti said to Ravina, Michte, how can you make such a hekesh? Kol arayas ikush lakshui left Eishes Ach. No. He asked the question like this. He asked another question. You have a hekesh that says that you can tell all the arayas. Let's get a picture of all the arayas. In this pasuk over here, in this psukim over here, you have a picture. You have all the psukim of the arayas, right? All of them. I can make it small, and you see ervas don't marry ervas your sister, your granddaughter, and your wife's your mother's sister. All that. Now, I could tell you that all arayas should be compared to Eishes Ach. Just like you're allowed to marry the brother's wife during Yibam, I can marry all the arayas for Yibam. Or there was one pasuk over here where it says clearly, where we learned clearly this pasuk that your wife's sister, you shouldn't do Yibam. So now I have a choice to compare all these arayas that are written in the pasuk to compare it to your wife's sister. And here the Torah says don't do Yibam. Or I could compare it to Eishes Ach, where the Torah says, do Yibam. So the question of the Gemara is, Michte, let us see. Alacha Medifti asked Ravina, Kol arayas Ika, I have a choice, all the arayas. Ika lakshinhu le'Eishes Ach. I could say they're all like Eishes Ach, and you're permitted to do Yibam. The Ika lakshinhu la'chois isha, and I can say they're all like your wife's sister, where you can't do Yibam. Why did you say that it's also to do Yibam? Because all the arayas should be like your wife's sister, where the Torah says don't do Yibam. Let's just compare it like your brother's wife. And your brother's wife, the Torah says you could do Yibam. That's what Yibam is all about, doing it to your brother's wife. So even if there's another erva, let us say that you could do Yibam. So the Gemara says, if you want, I can tell you, L'kula v'chumra. If you have a choice to make something not permitted, to make something permitted, or make it not permitted, l'chumra makshin. And that's somehow a rule. If you have a choice of hekesh, you always go the strict way. And that's why we go strict over here and say all the arayas are compared to achois isha, and just like achois isha you don't do yibam, so all the arayas you don't do yibam. Iba is saying, if you want, I can say it's simple, and this is what I've been trying to tell you. By every other erva, right, that falls to Yibam, you have two Isurim. For example, if your daughter falls to your Yibam, so you have it's your Eishes Ach, and it's your daughter. So Hacha Trei Isuri, V'Hacha Trei Isuri. By most cases of arayas falling to Yibam, you have two Isurim. Utrei Mitrei Alfinim. So we can say that just like a chois isha, the Torah says don't do yibum because there's two isurim. It's your wife's sister and Eishes ach. So also wherever there's going to be two isurim, you don't do yibum. Aval hacha by Eishes ach chad isuri. There's only one iser. It's only Eishes ach. Utrei, whenever there's going to be two arayas, mechada from one arayas lo yalfinam. So what the Gemara said is the reason why I don't tell you that all arayas are like Eishes ach, because Eishes ach is the exception where the Torah says, if you just have Eishes ach, then you're permitted to do yibum. But the Torah already told you that when there's another problem tacked on to Eishes ach, for example, achois ishta, the Torah told you don't do yibum. So then we're better off saying that every other erva, every other arayas that falls to yibum, you're going to have two problems there. One, it's the Eishes ach, and one, it's whatever arayas that's tacked onto it, whether it's your daughter, whether it's your mother's sister, whether it's your aunt, whatever it is, don't do there, it makes sense, don't do any yibum. So those says the Gemara, and that's what I need to allow. So allow, we have finally found a source of the reason why you need aleha for. Rava is going to tell you that really I don't need aleha. And the only reason why I need aleha is for the tzara. What is the tzara? The tzara is like this, the tzara of erva. So here again, you have a chois ishtay. So if Ada, your wife's sister, falls to yibum to Shimon, not only she's not allowed to do yibum with the wife's sister, but the tzara also, the rival wife, is also not permitted to do yibum for, because I would have thought that you could. That's what the aleha is for. That's what Rav is saying. To Rav Alma ever like tzricha cry. Don't need a pasuk for the erva itself. The wife's sister, I don't need a pasuk. Why should the mitzvah asay of yibum override the loiseh say of having relations with your wife's sister, which has karas to it? Ki itzrach, but what do I need a pasuk for? Lemesat tzara, to tell you that you cannot marry the rival of your wife's sister, which is no relation to your wife. You're not allowed to marry her. So the Gemara says, first of all, and that's the chiddush of the whole pasuk of Allah, to aser the rival of the wife. So the Gemara asks a question on Rava's the erva like tzricha kra. Does your wife's sister not need a pasuk? It seems from the brisa that even your wife's sister needs a pasuk, that you can't do yibum to her. But Tanya, we learned in a brisa, ainli elahi. I would only see on the pasuk that you can't do yibum from the wife's sister. So we see that the brisa itself was not clear. The brisa itself that it was not, doesn't consider it a simple given fact that you can't do yibum with your wife's sister, because it says I need the pasuk for her herself. So the Gemara says Mishum Sarasa. The brisa is just saying it's just the buildup that I need really the pasuk not for herself, the wife's sister, but I need it for the rival. Valkatani Ainli Elohein, but the brisa continues to say Ainli Elohein, that I only know that you can't do yibum with all the arayas. But you're telling me arayas, I don't even need a pasuk. Why should I say an essay overrides a loises sheyesh by karetz? So again, the Gemara answers the same teretz. Mishum tzoreseyim. For the rivals of those arayas, that's what I need a pasuk for. So again, Ravi gives a nice teretz that really, I would never think that you can marry your wife's sister if she falls to yibum, but I would think that you're allowed to marry the rival of your wife's sister. That's what I need the aleha for. I like that. So now the Gemara says, Toshma, come in here. A question against Rava. Rabbi Aimer v'lakacha ulakacha. It says by the regular Yevama psukim, when you marry two brothers, right over here, when your brother died, right? The pasuk says over here, the woman can't go and the woman can't marry anybody else. Yevama yavoya leha. The Yevama has to take her. And here it says, L'kacha, marry her, loyla isha, b'yibma, take her away from being a yabam. So there's two hays over here, and it's telling you specifically here you do yibam, nowhere else. So Rebbe has the same drushes instead of aleha. He uses the he uses these drushes of two extra words in the pasuk that teach you lesser tzoros v'arayos. You're not allowed to marry an erva that falls to Yibam and the co-wife of an erva that falls to Yibam. So you see that. So the question of the Gemara is that Rebbe used an extra pasuk to teach you that you can't marry the erva that falls to Yibam, and you told me that an erva that falls to Yibam you don't need a pasuk for. So the Gemara says no. Ema lesser tzoros shel arayos. That the Rebbe needed the pasuk just for one thing, to asa the arrival of the arayos. So the Gemara asks back, but that's not true. He used two psukim. He brought down two psukim. My love, chad le'erva, chad le'tzara. That really, Rebbe needed a pasuk to tell you don't do yibum with the erva nor with the tzara. But you told me, Rava, for an erva I don't need a pasuk because I would never think say sheyesh by kares. So the Gemara says, so why did Rebbe need two psukim over here? So the Gemara says, la idi tzara. Chad lemesa tzara b'mkayim mitzvah, chad lemishrei tzara shloi b'mkayim mitzvah. You see, if there is no mitzvah, you're permitted to marry the tzara of the arayos. So let's just take a look at that over here. What is shloi b'mkayim mitzvah? Let's say Reuven has a son-in-law, Moshe, and he was married to Reuven's daughter Dinah, right over here in this point over here, right over here. He was married to Dinah. Then Moshe also had another wife, Miriam. When Moshe, his son-in-law, dies, there's no prohibition. Of course, he can't marry Dinah. She doesn't fall to Yibam. It's no mitzvah over here. But if Reuven wants, he can marry Moshe, his son-in-law's his rival wife of his daughter. So that was what the chumash. That's why you need two psukim. One tells you that when there is a mitzvah, it's also to marry the rival of your daughter, of the arayos. When there's a mitzvah and they're both falling to Yibam, don't do Yibam with the arayos, and don't do Yibam with the rival of the arayos. But when there is no mitzvah, you are permitted to marry the rival of the arayos. My timer. What's the reason? The yibam. If there's a yibam story, who dasir tzara, then the rival is also shaloi b'mkayim yibam. When there is no yibam story, shari tzara, then the rival is permitted. The co-wife is permitted. Amarav Asher masnisanami dekedektani chamesh esrei nashim poitris tzaraseyim. The ilu turai su poitris leikaton shmamina. The Mishnah just says that an arayos exempts the co-wife from doing yibam. You don't do yibam with the co-wife, but it doesn't say for the arayos itself you don't do yibam too, because that the Mishnah says that's obvious. You don't do yibam to the arayos itself. So you don't even need a pasuk for that, and it's so obvious. All the allow was according to Rava to teach you that the rival you don't do yibam also. Even the rival is not really arayos, but now that she's falling yibam together with an arayos, just like you don't do yibam with the erva, the pasuk tells you don't do yibam with the tzara, because if it wasn't for the pasuk, I would have done yibam with this tzara. So the Gemara asked this question: My shana, why erva deloit tzricha kra? When arayos falls to yibam, you say that's obvious. Don't do yibam because it's an essay that has chorus. But Sora name like to buy a kra mishum the ein essay doicha loicha say sheyesh b'chorus. That yes, that I would never think that you could do yibam with the tzara, because if you look closely at the pasuk, the way Rashi learned it, the pasuk says. And this is the way we learned the pasuk. You see, the Allah tells you that this pasuk of marrying two sisters is actually talking about yibam, and the Torah tells you when your wife's sister falls to yibam, don't do yibam. And litzrar, even if the co-wife of that woman falls to yibam, don't do yibam for her, because if you do, you're going to get chorus. So the Gemara is asking a question over here. Since you get chorus over here, why would I think that you would need a pasuk to tell you that since she's also included in this arayos, why would I need the pasuk to tell you Why would I need that extra pasuk to tell you that you don't do yibum? It's ein essay doiche leisa seish yesh by karis. Now it's an odd kind of question over here because that's how you know that the whole pasuk, the point of the pasuk. But Amalei Rav Acha Berei Bar Babel Bar Ravina Hachi Kam Mishmei de Rava. This is how you explain it in the Rava. Tzara Name Lo Yitzrach Kra. I don't need the pasuk of Aleha to tell you that you don't do yibum because Ein essay doika loises shesh b'koyers, and what the Torah is telling you, don't do yibum. Not, you can't marry your wife's sister, and you can't marry the rival of your wife's sister. But what the pasuk Oleh teaches you, that limitation of marrying your wife's sister's rival is only if they're falling to yibum. Ki itzrach kra. When do I need a pasuk? Le mishrei. We go to Chesam and Beis. Lemishrei tzara shaloi bimkoin mitzvah, that the tzara is the rival is permitted shaloi bimkoin mitzvah. Imagine a stranger married your wife's sister, and he has another wife. When that stranger dies, you can't marry your wife's sister, but you're permitted to marry that co-rival because they never fell to yibum to you because this was a stranger she was married. That's what the pasuk is teaching you. So look closely at the pasuk. The pasuk is teaching you that the isha lechoised, you can't take the co-wife of your wife's sister only if they're falling to yibum to you. So you can't do yibum with your wife's sister. You can't do yibum with the co-wife. But if they're not falling to yibum to you, such that, let's say your wife's sister married a stranger and he had another wife, if he dies, you can marry that lady. You can marry that lady because that's an erva, that's a co-wife, shaloi bimkoin mitzvah. And that's what the whole pasuk is teaching you. Now comes along Gemara does a fascinating thing, and this will take us to the end of the story over here. The Gemara does a fascinating thing and says, maybe, and this is why Arias gets fascinating. The Gemara is now going to say a fabulous havim in it that maybe you are permitted to marry your wife's sister. Because Amalei Rami B'Chamal Rava Ema, let us say, Erev Gufa Shloi B'Mkoi Mitzvah Tishrei. If your wife's sister is not falling to yibum, you just decide to want to marry your wife's sister, let us say it's permitted. So because the Torah only says don't marry your wife's sister if she's falling to yibum. But if she's not falling to yibum, you could marry your wife's sister. How about that? Marrying two sisters like Yaakov Avinu. So Rava answered it, wouldn't you say a kal v'chomer? Bimkoim mitzvah, if when they fall to yibum, when your wife's sister falls to yibum, you're not allowed to marry her. Asira. Shloi bimkoim mitzvah, if there's no mitzvah there, Shari, you're going to tell me you're allowed to just stop marry your wife's sister? Amalei. So Rami Bar Chama said, beautiful logic. Let's look at the co-wife of your wife's sister. So when your co-wife of your wife's sister is falling to yibum, you say you can't do yibum with her. Asira. But if she was married, there is no mitzvah there. If your wife's sister was married to a stranger, and there's a co-wife there, and that stranger died, you are permitted to marry that Sarah. So why don't you say the same thing with your wife's sister herself? That when she falls to yibum to you, then the Torah says don't marry two sisters. But if there's no mitzvah there, maybe you're allowed to marry two sisters. Unbelievable. You're allowed to marry two sisters. Omalei. So Rava said, Olecha amakra b'chayeha kol shebechaya. As long as your wife's sister's alive, you're not allowed. As long as your wife is alive, you can't marry her sister. It says v'isha lechoisa litra. There's an extra word bechayeha. As long as your wife is alive, you can't marry the sister. There's an extra pasuk there. So the Gemara says, "Hi bechayeha." That's coming to tell you that if your wife dies, you are permitted to marry your wife's sister. So it could be that when your wife, what the pasuk is saying is that when she falls to yibum and your wife is alive, you can't marry her. But if your wife would die, then you are permitted to marry her. But who's to tell you that when there is no mitzvah, you're not allowed to marry two sisters? So the Gemara says, but I know you can't marry two sisters from the word one. If your wife is alive, don't marry the sister. Isha el achoisa nafka. So the Gemara says, if we just say that your married wife with her sister have a min in the skar shesharyu, that I would think that if you divorce your wife, that would be permitted to marry your wife's sister. As long as that first lady that you were married to is alive, kol shebechayeha, as long as she's alive, you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister. Even though she got divorced, you can't marry her. You can't marry your wife's sister. But that's only in a case where she was falling to yibum to you. But how do you know in a case where she's not falling to yibum to you? And where does the Torah tell you that you can't marry your wife's sister? Maybe the Torah is only telling you can't marry your wife's sister if she's falling to yibum. But if there's no mitzvah there, you could marry two sisters. So that's the fabulous Gemara. So the Gemara answers, Elam Arav Tachlim Sheidu Rava, I have a teretz. Trei Kroi Ksiva. There are two psukim. One pasuk says, Isha ala choyser loisikach litzrar. You're not allowed to take, there's two averis. You can't marry two sisters. You can't marry two sisters. And the tzara. You can't marry the sister with the tzara. So let's say your wife's sister and the rival. Uksiv legalis ervasa. You're not allowed to marry the arayas, but it doesn't say anything about marrying the rival, the chada mashma. So the first pasuk says there are two women you're not allowed to marry, your wife's sister and the tzara. Then the pasuk goes on and says you can't marry your wife's sister, but that makes no mention about the rival. Hoketzat. So how do you resolve that? So we say bimkai mitzvah. If there's a mitzvah, and they're falling to yibum, your wife's sister and her rival, shtein asuris. Both of them you can't marry. Shaloi bimkai mitzvah, but if there is no mitzvah, then that what the pasuk is saying, he asura, your wife's sister is asa, utzarasa mutaris. But if there's no mitzvah, then the rival would be permitted. So the Gemara asks back, epachana, maybe say the opposite. Bimkai mitzvah, if there's a mitzvah falling to yibum, then maybe the Torah tells you, nah, don't marry your wife's sister, but try to marry the rival. He asura, but tzarasa mutaris. She should be asur, but the rival should be permitted because there's a mitzvah and your brother died. You can't marry your wife's sister, but maybe the Torah said do yibum on the co-wife. And v'shaloibim kaim mitzvah, but when there is no mitzvah, shtein asuris. When there is no mitzvah and nothing is falling to yibum, maybe in that case, when your wife's sister was married to a stranger and then he dies, maybe you can't marry both the rival plus, of course, your wife's sister and your rival. Maybe that's what the Torah is telling you. So Gemara says in Cain lo yoima allow. I don't need allow. Why? Because my first default is to say what you're just saying. The first default will tell me that when they fall to yibum, if you can't do with your wife's sister, do the yibum with your wife's tzara. And when there is no mitzvah, I would tell you they're both asur. That's my first response. But if that's my first response, then I don't need Aleha to tell me that. Once Aleha comes into the picture, it tells me it's counterintuitive what you would think, that when they fall to Yibum, the Torah is more stricter. Even when there's a mitzvah, the Torah says don't marry the wife, sister, and don't marry the rival. And in the opposite case, when there is no mitzvah, the Torah only asked the wife's sister, but did not ask the rival. And one last question to this whole logic. Amalei Ravashi Rav Kahana. Maybe the Torah says, don't this aleha, the pasuk that says, don't marry two sisters and the co-wife, aleha, during Yibam. Maybe the Torah is giving you a permission and telling you like this. This is what the Torah says. You don't take two sisters and their co-wife, that when there is no, when you're not doing Yibam, then don't take her and the rival, like we know. Aval bimkaim, when there is no Yibam, aval bimkaim aleha, maybe the Torah is trying to tell you, shtei mutaris, that not only can you, when you're doing the mitzvah, I would say just the opposite, that you can marry your wife's sister along with the tzara. So maybe, how do you know the Torah is very strict in telling you, don't marry your wife's sister and the rival when they fall to Yibam? Maybe just the opposite. Aleha is telling you should marry both. You can marry either or, the wife's sister and the rival. And when they don't fall in Yibam, means when there is no mitzvah, then you have a problem of marrying your wife's sister and the rival. So either two of them will be, in the case, two of them will be aser, which is shloibim kai mitzvah, and two of them will be mutar when there is a mitzvah. But that's a problem, because the Torah says there are two cases. in one case, two are usher, and one case, only one is usher. We don't have, so we have to resolve that. That's what the Gemara is saying. When is a case that only one of them is going to be usher and not the other? The way you're saying it, if there's a mitzvah, shtei mutaris, then you say you could do yibum with the wife's sister and the rival. Isha loibim kai mitzvah, shtei asuris. If it's not a mitzvah, you're saying both are usher. So let's summarize. Let's give this the one-line conclusion. The one-line conclusion that ended this page over here from the very beginning, the Gemara said, how do you know? Maybe the Torah has no problem with you marrying your wife's sister if it's not in a yibum situation. If it's not a yibum situation, maybe I'm permitted to marry my wife's sister. Stamazai. Only the Torah was very concerned, if it's yibum, don't marry your wife's sister. But if there is no yibum mitzvah, maybe you could marry your wife's sister. And the Gemara has this whole cheshbon. The Gemara comes to the conclusion that because the Torah said, one time the Torah says, don't marry your wife's sister and the rival. And one time it says, don't marry your wife's sister. I have to resolve that and say that when the Torah is strict of not marrying both of them, the Torah is talking about bimkoi mitzvah. When there's a mitzvah of yibum, the Torah says, don't marry her and her rival. When there is no mitzvah, the Torah says, Lagalis ervasa, still don't marry your wife's sister, but you're allowed to marry her rival. In other words, if she was at one time married to somebody else and that other person died, you're allowed to marry the rival of your wife's sister because it's not a mitzvah. She's not falling to yibum. Fascinating Gemara, which the Gemara is like, had Havamin that one could marry your wife's sister. With even
is there any explanation in the Mefarshim why it's so counterintuitive? That I would think if I had a question on a test, I would definitely choose that when there's a mitzvah, then you can go ahead and marry because you don't have a line there for your brother for the dead brother, and yet it says absolutely the opposite. When there is no mitzvah, go ahead and marry it. Doesn't make sense to me.
Right. That is the chayk. That's what the Gemara says right over here.
It's like a hook. It's like it's not explained,
right. It makes sense. Rashi says that exactly what you just said. Rashi says because the Rashi says misvara hachi. I would have said my own thought would be like this: hetera, you're permitted to marry the co-wife when you're doing a mitzvah. The isura. So in other, Rashi says that idea. Rashi says that idea, what you're just saying, that intuitively I would say when there is a mitzvah, then you could marry the co-wife. And when there is no mitzvah, then the Torah says that don't marry the co-wife of your wife's sister. So that would be the intuitive way to say it. Right. But now the aleho comes. Now the Torah added the word aleho. It says the opposite way. That when there is a mitzvah, the co-wife is asar. When there is no mitzvah, the co-wife is mutar.
Wow. And one example after another, all we're learning, it basically, Chazal gives you, or the Torah itself, it gives you like a leniency when there's a mitzvah involved. And if it's not, then they're strict. And this is, I think I've never seen this before.
Right. It's exactly it. There's one leniency by your Eishes Ach. Do we extend that leniency if there was more, if you tack on, if it's your wife's daughter and Eishes Ach, or if it's your wife's sister and Eishes Ach?
Yeah.
We don't give that leniency.
Right.
But
okay. It's really fascinating. Okay.
I don't think we're on tomorrow night. Maybe if I have time, I'll post the Gemara. I'll, do a recording of the Gemara and then post it online and send out a WhatsApp.
Have an easy fast, everybody.
Everybody have an easy fast and a Freilichem Purim.
Freilichem
Purim. All the best.
Thank you.
Freilichem Purim.
Freilichem Purim.